So I first of all would like to thank again the Sahasra ENT Foundation as well as Dr. Sriharsha for taking this initiative. And regarding Dr. Mustafa, I think he's already introduced. So he's working with Professor Tarabichi, and as well as he's one of the important members of the International Working Group on Endoscopic Ear Surgery. And my association with Dr. Mustafa, I met him during one of these courses in Italy with Professor Macchioni and Professor Presutti. And in fact, I had spent a good 2 weeks with them, even in the dissection, doing hands-on dissection. And I think he also further followed up by doing an endoscopic ear fellowship with Professor Macchioni later. That is the time when I was with Professor Sanna. So I think he has keen interest in endoscopic ear surgery. And I myself am basically a microscopic ear surgeon, but endoscopic ear surgery is going to be also a very important part of otologist armamentarium. And I think we have a right person to give us a perspective on that, or to start few ideas about endoscopic ear surgery. So it's over to you, Mustafa.
I'll just start sharing my screen.
Okay. I think any questions can be shared in the chat, or try to choose some important questions and ask. Is it okay, Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, it means I would like to answer all the questions towards the end of the
end of the session. Yeah.
So yeah, so thank you for the nice introduction, Uday. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Mustafa Kapia from Dubai, and today I'm going to talk on endoscopic ear surgery. Just a minute. So it's not a new topic, but I must say that many established ear surgeons are still very hesitant to accept the fact that endoscope is a much better and the superior tool than microscope in middle ear surgery. And today I'm going to talk on some principles, some tips and tricks, an overview of endoscopic anatomy, especially the retrotympanum area, and how to start endoscopic ear surgery in our practice. So how did I started my endoscopic surgery? I completed my MS from Mumbai in 2012, and to be very honest, at that time I didn't even know that we can do a complete ear surgery using an endoscope. I did not even know the term endoscopic ear surgery. I met Dr. Tarabichi in Dubai during the First World Congress in 2015, and soon thereafter I started working with him. So it's a privilege to work in the institute, which is like a birthplace of endoscopic ear surgery. And I remember during my initial days when he used to operate on cholesteatoma cases, so he used to call me and he used to show me all the different structures which we can see with the endoscope, and he used to tell me, Mustafa, I have been telling this since last 20 years that the endoscope is a much better and superior tool, but the people are not accepting it. But I think nowadays people are more open to this idea of endoscopic ear surgery, and especially the new ENT colleagues, they are accepting it more freely in their practice. So we are coming up with this new center, Tarabichi Stamberger Ear and Sinus Institute in Dubai. It's a dream project of Dr. Tarabichi and late Professor Stamberger. The building is ready and we are going to move in next few months. So we are also conducting this endoscopic ear and endoscopic sinus hands-on courses twice in a year in Dubai. And I strongly recommend to the new surgeons who are accepting this endoscopic ear surgery to go and attend such kind of courses in their countries, because it really helps to know the anatomy of the middle ear, to know how to handle the endoscope in ear surgery. Just a small announcement, we have this scholarship program. So we sponsor 7 candidates from all over the world. We sponsor their travel, their accommodation, their registrations for these courses. So I would strongly recommend to young ENT physicians out there, please visit our website and drop your CV. So these are two books which are must read before we start endoscopic ear surgery. So this one is actually the dissection manual, silver book by Karl Stoers, and this one is like the Bible of endoscopic ear surgery by Professor Macchioni and Prasuti from Italy. So before I begin, I just want to clarify some terminology. Otoendoscopy is to use an endoscope just to examine the middle ear, and endoscopic ear surgery is actually to perform ear surgery using an endoscope. Michael Cohen and colleagues from Boston, they devised a classification system of endoscopic ear surgery, and they classified it into three classes. So class 0 is exclusive microscopic ear surgery, wherein the surgeon is not using an endoscope at all. Class 1 is when the surgeon is using endoscope only for inspection. For instance, he is doing canal wall up or canal wall down mastectomy or just a simple tympanoplasty. But towards the end of the surgery or just before putting the graft, he will just put in endoscope. He will look at the anatomy. He will look for any residual disease. And even if he finds any residual disease, he's going to pull out the endoscope, bring in the microscope again, and he's going to complete his dissection only under microscope. Class 2 is combined endoscopic and microscopic approach, wherein the surgeon is using endoscope for limited time or limited dissection. Like he will do only certain surgical steps like elevating the tympanomeatal flap. He will use endoscope for some dissection in the different areas and recesses. And class 3 is complete transcanal exclusive endoscopic ear surgery. So we did review of literature in 2018 to look for all the published articles in the last 50 years on the use of endoscope in ear surgery. And at the same time, we also conducted an online email survey of otologists in 2010 and 2018 to look for means how they are using endoscope in their ear surgery practice. So before 1990, there were only 6 articles, 4 of them on the diagnostic use of endoscope and 2 of them on endoscopic assisted ear surgery. The first article on endoscopic ear surgery was published from Egypt in 1992 by Al-Guindi on endoscopic myringoplasty. And as you can see, there has been a really upsurge, especially in the last decade. There are more than 350 articles which are already published on the use of endoscope in ear surgery. So clearly, there has been a shift away from the use of endoscope from diagnostic endoscopy to endoscopic assisted, and now to lately to transcanal complete endoscopic ear surgery. So the microscope provides an excellent view in the line of sight of surgery, but using it transcanal could be really tough, especially in pediatric cases where they have a very narrow ear canal. The transcanal microscopic surgery could be really challenging, and especially for cases with congenital cholesteatoma. Extensive bone removal is always needed when we want to access these areas where the disease is limited only to the middle ear. Mastoid is always needed to get this extensive disease, which is extending far anterior into the anterior epitympanum, supratuberous recess, or posteriorly into the sinus tympani area. So why use an endoscope to perform ear surgery? Because you can do a lot more transcanal using an endoscope than you can do with a microscope. There is no question, there is no doubt about that. In most of the cases, you can avoid a post-auricular incision when you want to access this complex middle ear structure. A mastoid can be avoided in most of the cases to gain access, which cannot be accessed with a microscope transcanal. And in our opinion, endoscope not only is a less invasive surgical approach, but it's more functional and physiologic surgery of the middle ear. So this is the microscopic view. A surgeon is doing exploratory tympanotomy for a patient with conductive hearing loss. He is using Leica microscope of full zoom and with a 6 millimeter oral speculum. So this is the view which we are getting. So we can see chorda tympani, the long process of incus, stapes, cochlear promontory, and a glimpse of round window niche. And as you can see, the pathology is spontaneous erosion of long process of incus. So the surgeon removes the microscope, and he brings in 0-degree endoscope. So this is the view which we can get with an endoscope. The conclusion remains the same, that the pathology is the spontaneous erosion of incus, but look at the surrounding structure, look at the anatomy which we can get with endoscope. So now it's right ear, anterior, posterior, superior, and inferior, and you can see handle of malleus now, processus cochleariformis, body of incus, tympanic facial, complete stapes, stapedius tendon, cochlear promontory, round window niche with posterior pillar, tegmen, anterior pillar, hypotympanic cells, and also the infracochlear or subcochlear canaliculus. So the primary advantage of endoscope is to provide a wide angle view, and it really helps us to understand the anatomy of the middle ear in a much better and superior way. I remember during my residency days, we used to read a lot about this ventilation pathways, different mucosal folds, anterior and posterior isthmus, tensor folds, but at that time it was really difficult to conceptualize all this structure. But now with the help of endoscope, at least it's much clearer in my mind. The other advantage is we can visualize all the hidden structures, all the deep recesses within the middle ear cavity. With the help of angled endoscope and angle instruments, we can access these recesses during our cholesteatoma surgery. When we use a microscope, the field of view is really compromised by the long shaft of the instrument, like the surgical burr or the curette, and sometimes it's further compromised by the hand of the operating surgeon. But endoscope has the ability to give us a fish eye view beyond the shaft of these surgical instruments. It's a less minimal, less tissue dissection, and the patient has less post-operative pain and faster post-operative recovery. Also, if you want to magnify any image, we can just bring in the endoscope nearer to that structure in question, and there is no need for us to refocusing again and again. The biggest disadvantage is it's a one-handed surgical technique, and I personally think that it's not going to change in near future. There are various endoscopic holders available in the market, but I personally feel that it's really dangerous. Like back in India, we do a lot of ear surgeries under local anesthesia. So imagine you are putting an endoscope with an endoscopic holder, and patient suddenly moves his or her head. So there are remote possibility that you might damage the structures within the middle ear cavity with the tip of the endoscope. And another thing is when you put 3 instruments in a very small ear canal, so you need to pull your endoscope way out to provide some space for the instruments, and this is like the worst of both the worlds. Now you have a 2D image in which is far away, and the primary objective of the endoscope is to look at the structure very close by. There is a loss of depth perception and binocular vision. Microscope provides us a binocular vision and a good 3D image, but when we do sinus surgery, we are putting endoscope in and out of the nose, and this movement of endoscope gives us a sense of like a 3D sense, and the same thing is happening when we do ear surgery. Definitely there is a learning curve and physician training involved with endoscopic ear surgery, but with the availability of the online videos, the online courses, and different hands-on cadaver dissection courses happening all over the world, I think we can like learn all these techniques quite easily nowadays. There is fogging and smearing of the tip of the endoscope with bleeding, and it can be easily avoided by using an antifog. So when we say endoscopic ear surgery, there are few concerns about it, and one of the most important concern is the thermal damage or the heat damage by the tip of the endoscope. There are many published articles on that. This one is by Dan Lee in 2014, and he measured the temperature fluctuation with regards to the tip of the endoscope and the round window membrane by using a 3 millimeter 0-degree endoscope at different light intensity. And at the same time, he measured the decrease in temperature when the light source is switched off or the suction is applied. So he found that there is a rapid temperature elevation up to 46 degree at the tip of endoscope when the light source was used at 100%, and this temperature occurred up to 8 millimeter from the tip of the endoscope. And there is a rapid decrease as well when the light source is switched off or the suction is applied. There is another study by Seiji Kakahata from Japan, wherein he measured temperature at two different locations, one at the tip of the endoscope and another within the middle ear cavity by putting three thermocouples within the tympanic cavity. He put it on over the promontory, tympanic facial, and lateral semicircular canal. He used two different endoscope, 2.7 millimeter and 4 millimeter. He used two different light source, xenon and LED, at two different light intensity. One at clinical setting. When I say clinical setting, it means 30% for xenon and 40% for LED, and another setting was at 100%. And he found out that the maximum temperature measured within the middle ear cavity were well below 31 degrees Celsius at clinical setting, but it increased to 44 degrees Celsius when the light intensity was increased to 100%. And similarly, at the tip of endoscope, the temperature were all below normal, but it increased drastically to 110 degrees Celsius when the temperature, when the light intensity was kept at 100%. Both these studies were carried out in a human temporal bone model. There is third study from Turkey, wherein they measured actual intraoperative temperature, and the endoscopic holder was used. They also used two different endoscope, 2.7 millimeter and 4 millimeter at two different light intensity, 50% and 100%, and these are the results. There is definitely more heat production when we use light intensity at 100%, and this was evident in all three studies. So to conclude, to implicate, yes, there are chances of causing heat or thermal damage when we do endoscopic ear surgery, but it is possible only when we are keeping the light intensity at 100%. So we strongly recommend to keep your light intensity at suboptimal level, to keep it below 50%. Make a habit of checking the light source intensity whenever you start doing surgery. Tell your staff nurse, tell your assistant to check on it before you start doing the surgery. So the question comes, when we decrease the light intensity, does it affect the quality of image which we are getting? So there is another study by Arun Iyer from Scotland. So what he did, he took a consecutive set of operative images at different light intensity, 10%, 30%, 50%, and 100%. And he sent these images to 8 international experts to review these images and actually grade them depending on the detail of anatomy, the color contrast, the overall quality, and the ease and stability of operation. And what he found is that there was no correlation, there was no significance between the light intensity and the quality of image which we are getting. So again, the recommendation was to use the light intensity at the suboptimal level, to use it below 50%. So these are the images. If you look at this 30% light intensity image and 100%, there is hardly any difference in the anatomy. And another concern is the ototoxic effect of the anti-fog which we are using. There are a couple of studies out there, and it does show that there are some hair cell damage when we use anti-fog. But our recommendation is, whenever you clean your endoscope with anti-fog, keep a wet gauze or a wet patty next to it and wipe excess of anti-fog with this before you go in and do the surgery. So when we talk about endoscopic ear surgery, the ear canal has a very different, significant and an important role to play, because this is the main access door for the surgery. So unlike in post-auricular microscopic ear surgery, we do the posterior myotomy and we completely reflect cartilaginous ear canal anteriorly out of our surgical way, and we end up doing surgery only in the bony canal. But in endoscopic ear surgery, the relationship between the bony and the cartilaginous ear canal, the size of the ear canal, the orientation of the ear canal, really makes a huge impact on the outcome and our ease of doing the surgery. So how to optimize our access through the ear canal? So there are certain ways. One is by proper positioning of the patient. If this is the coronal CT, and if you look at the CT scan, ear canal always has this upward sloping nature. So we need to bring axis of this ear canal in our line of vision of surgery. So how to get that? So we get it by by keeping an extra bit of extension, and we keep this headrest in other way, and by doing so we bring the axis of the ear canal perpendicular to the operating table, and this neutral position really gives us some extra space to move our endoscope sideways so that we can access all different structures within the middle ear. Another thing is we need to take away the shoulder of the patient like to get some extra space to keep our endoscope parallel to the patient. This is really important when you are doing surgery in the attic region. Otherwise, you keep hitting your hand over the shoulder of the patient. So try and get away the shoulder. Mm. Another observation is there is always a misalignment between the bony and cartilaginous ear canal. That's the reason we pull our ear upward and out whenever we are examining the ear to realign both the canals. So there are two ways of doing it. One is by putting this retention stitch, Taravici stitch. So we use 2-0 Vicryl suture. You can use any suture material, it's up to you, but try to use a big needle, and especially if it's a revision case and the patient underwent post-auricular approach before, try to use a cutting or a reverse cutting needle. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you to get that needle out from the post-auricular area. So we go beyond the cartilaginous kink and we put the suture and we pull on it and we realign our bony and cartilaginous canal, and it provides us a good access for the instrumentation within the middle ear cavity. This is a short video of doing it. And we pull it and we realign the canal. The another way of doing it is to straighten out that kink, the cartilaginous kink, with the shaft of the rigid endoscope which we are using. Like in endoscopic sinus surgery, whenever we are doing the surgery, we are hooking our endoscope near the nasal vestibule, and the same thing we have to do when we are doing the endoscopic ear surgery. We need to take support of the ear canal. Do not keep floating in the ear canal. During the initial part of the endoscopic ear surgery, when we elevate the tympanomeatal flap, we can rest our endoscope over the inferior or the posterior canal wall. But as we progress and as we enter into the middle ear, and if you want to pursue different areas, like this is the left ear, superior, inferior, anterior, and posterior. And if you want to pursue disease in the attic area, we need to create some space for the endoscope inferiorly. Similarly, if you want to pursue some disease in the retrotympanum, we have to put our endoscope anteriorly. I'll just give an overview of the retrotympanic anatomy. We don't have much time to cover all the anatomy. As you all know that middle ear cavity is divided into sub-compartments, and retrotympanum lies in the posterior aspect of the tympanic cavity, and it is divided into superior retrotympanum and inferior retrotympanum by a bridge of bone known as subiculum, and it extends from the styloid prominence towards the posterior pillar of the round window niche. So this is 0-degree view with 4mm endoscope cadaver after removing the tympanic membrane. So you can see handle of malleus, incus, processus cochleariformis, tendon, tympanic fascial, stapes, foot plate, pyramidal eminence, stapedius tendon, facial recess, ponticulus, subiculum, sinus tympani, posterior pillar of round window niche, tegmen, anterior pillar, funiculus with the inferior tympanic artery, the hypotympanic air cells, the carotid canal, and the eustachian tube. So the superior retrotympanum actually contains four small spaces or recesses within it, and there are two recesses or the two space lying anterior and medial, and two lateral and posterior with respect to the third or the vertical track of facial nerve and the pyramidal eminence. Actually, the pyramidal eminence acts as a fulcrum within the retrotympanum, and there are two ridges which are coming out of it. There is one ridge which is coming outwards and transversely towards the caudal prominence, and this is the caudal ridge which divides the lateral space into facial sinus superiorly and lateral tympanic sinus inferiorly. There is another ridge which is going inwards towards the promontory. This is ponticulus, separating posterior sinus superiorly from the sinus tympani inferiorly. So we have four spaces within the superior retrotympanum: facial sinus, separating from lateral tympanic sinus by caudal ridge, and posterior sinus, separating from sinus tympani by this ponticulus. There are various anatomical variants of ponticulus. This is the classical ridge type, absent ponticulus, and bridge type, where the sinus tympani is in communication with the posterior sinus under the ponticulus. This configuration is really important because sometimes if the cholesteatoma is extending underneath, so we need to drill out, we need to remove the ponticulus to get that cholesteatoma out. Similarly, we have variants of subiculum, ridge type, bridge type, and the absent subiculum. So the sinus tympani, the famous sinus tympani. So the sinus tympani lies medial to the pyramidal eminence, stapedius tendon, and the facial nerve, and it lies lateral to the posterior semicircular canal and the vestibule. It has different orientation, the different configuration in shape. This is the classical shape, separated from posterior sinus by the ponticulus. This is confluent type when the sinus tympani is in communication with the posterior sinus. This is partition type when the sinus tympani is further divided into upper and lower half by an extra ridge of bone. And this is restricted type when the jugular bulb is very much high, and it's limiting the inferior aspect of the sinus tympani. But the most important is the classification based on its depth. So type A sinus tympani, shallow sinus tympani, where the medial wall of the facial nerve forms the bound of the sinus tympani. Type B, when the sinus tympani is extending medial to the facial nerve but not posterior to it. And type D sinus tympani, where the sinus tympani is extending medially and posterior to the facial nerve. Clinically, type A and type D sinus tympani can be accessed with the transcanal endoscopic option, but in cases where the sinus tympani is very deep, going posterior to it, so we might need to do a transmastoid retrofacial approach to access the disease in that area. Similarly, we have a facial recess classification. This is typical with the caudal ridge. This is type caudal ridge. This is partially absent, and this is completely absent. In the same way, we have a classification based on the depth of the sinus, depth on the facial recess, type A, type B, and type C. Sometimes the retrotympanic pneumatization may go under the pyramidal eminence, creating a space known as a subpyramidal space. So this subpyramidal space is bounded laterally by the medial aspect of the pyramidal eminence, and medially by the lateral wall of the tympanum. Inferiorly, it is bounded by the ponticulus, and posteriorly and superiorly, it is bounded by the facial nerve. And there are different classifications depending on the depth and the communication with the sinus tympani and the posterior sinus. So if the disease is extending inside this deep space, so we might need to drill away the pyramidal eminence to get access. And in few cases, in some cases, this pyramidal eminence might be fused with the lateral tympanic wall, and there is no subpyramidal space in that case. So The sinus subtympanicus, also like the inferior tympanum, is also known as the sinus subtympanicus, and it lies between the subiculum superiorly and funiculus inferiorly. It contains the round window niche, which has posterior pillar, the tegmen, which is actually the dorsolateral edge of the cochlear promontory, and in some cases we need to curate out. In most of the cases, we need to curate out the tegmen in order to view at the round window membrane and the anterior pillar. Fustis is like a thick, smooth ridge of bone which is linking the styloid prominence with the basal turn of cochlea, and it's a very good anatomical landmark in order to identify the round window niche. Uh, uh, there are few pneumatization in and around fustis. It is known as the Proctor's area concomitant. So again, left ear, subiculum, funiculus with the inferior tympanic artery, posterior pillar, tegmen, anterior pillar, styloid prominence, fustis, area concomitant, and the subcochlear or the infracochlear canaliculus. Sometimes the pneumatization might extend anterior towards the petrous apex, and depending on the degree of pneumatization, there are three classifications to it. One is type A, where it's deeply pneumatized and going up to the petrous apex. Type B, where it's partially pneumatized, and type C, when there is no pneumatization and there is absent subcochlear canaliculus. There are various variants of funiculus as well, ridge type, bridge type for the absent. Previously, this funiculus was named as a sustentaculum promontory by Proctor. He constantly find that the inferior tympanic artery is running within the funiculus bone. So the name came from Latin. Sustentaculum means support, but like this is renamed by Professor Marchioni as a funiculus. Fin in Latin means borderline or the boundary. So that's why the name came as a funiculus. So when you start your endoscopic ear surgery, you actually don't need any fancy instruments to start with. Nowadays, almost all of us are doing endoscopic sinus surgery, and we can use the same 0 degree, 4 millimeter, 18 centimeter long endoscope to start our first case. The longer instruments usually helps us to have our both hands at a different distance from the ear canal, and it really avoids like interfering with one another during the surgery. And the added advantage of the bigger endoscope is like it's really impossible for the 4 millimeter endoscope to go all the way inside the tympanic cavity and injure the structure. So for the beginners, if you don't have any 3 millimeter endoscope, you can still start your surgery with 4 millimeter endoscope. As you start doing more and more surgery, as you get used to the instruments used in the endoscopic ear surgery, you can get 3 millimeter, 0 degree or 30 degree endoscope. There are two cameras available in the market. One is the single chip camera, but the problem with single chip analog camera is it has a tendency to red out during the surgery when we are operating in a narrow space like ear canal. Although in endoscopic ear surgery there is not much of a bleeding, but the field of view gets to get more reddened, which causes complete saturation of the camera, and it gives an orange hue over the field, and it really becomes very difficult to identify even the simple anatomical structures. But in case of three chip cameras, it uses the prism, which segregates this spectrum of light, red, blue, and green, into three different chips, and it avoids the red out phenomena. So whenever you are starting your surgery, try to do it under using three chip camera, because if you are using single chip and if you are not getting a good field of vision, then there are high chances that you will give up too early and you will switch to microscopic ear surgery. I have already mentioned about xenon and LED light, and try to keep it at the suboptimal below 50% intensity. And you can use the same conventional otology instrument which you are using for your regular surgery for the endoscopic cases. So these are the instruments which we use. So we have this 4 millimeter, 18 centimeter long endoscope. We have this 20 ml syringe with the soft tip catheter. These are few suction instruments, the Penati, and the regular suction. These are pair of forceps, some skin hook to harvest our tragal perichondral graft. This is a sterile wooden tongue depressor for preparation of the tragal perichondrium graft. This is the block to prepare our cartilage and ossicular prosthesis. One curette and chisel and hammer. We usually use it during our stapes surgery. This is 20 Vicryl, which we use to take the Tarabichi retention stitch. These are a pair of cup forceps, straight, upward, some Baluchi scissors, and the alligator forceps. And for the straight instruments, we really use only 3 or 4 house, a Rosen, and some different angle round knife. So once you start doing more and more endoscopic cases, then you can get more of this curved dissector, Thomason dissector. These are really useful when you are starting to do your cholesteatoma cases. Then you can get some curette, and this is round knife which comes with a suction, and it is really helpful when you are elevating a tympanomeatal flap. These are Penetti suction instruments, which has different curvature, different angles. Some are blunt, some are very fine, and this really helps us to dissect out the disease during the surgery. And another advantage is the rotatal, the rotating connector, which we use for the Penetti suction instrument. So it usually becomes very easy to manipulate this dissector or suction instrument within the middle ear cavity. This is the OR setup. So the surgeon is standing or sitting on the ipsilateral side of surgery. We have the screen on the opposite side, the scrub nurse here. You need to keep your microscope ready in case if you need to switch over during your initial endoscopic ear surgery cases. The anesthetist, and you keep your cautery and the drill and piezo on the leg end. In order to avoid some neck pain or back pain, or shoulder pain, it is always advisable to have the center of the screen at the same height of your eye, and because it avoids the temptation of overextending the neck during the surgery. You can sit, you can stand. I've seen Professor Marchioni, Dr. Mohan Reddy, they usually stand and do the surgery, but we personally sit and do the surgery. You can use this armrest to rest your hand, and you can hold endoscope the way you want, but just make sure to get this cable out of your surgical way. So one point I want to make is if you are a right-handed surgeon, try to do surgery in the left ear first, because there are two advantages of that. You are holding an endoscope in your non-dominant hand and you are resting it in the inferior canal wall, and with the dominant hand you are doing the instrumentation, so there are very less chances of instrument crossover when you are right-handed and doing surgery in the left ear. And this is the way I do it. Another important point to make is you need to really trim the ear canal hair in a very good way. Otherwise, whenever you are putting in your endoscope, it's going to smudge and fog, and it's really frustrating. So give it some time for trimming the ear canal hair, and it also allows some time for the injection to work. And it's really for the beginner, it really gives you a sense of hand-eye coordination, and simultaneously you can also like get a good training to use the instruments holding an endoscope in one hand. So when you start doing your endoscopic ear surgery, it's usually good to begin with surgeries which are likely to go well and lend themselves to endoscopic approach. So if you are already doing conventional microscopic ear surgery, then start using endoscope just for inspection, just to get used to the anatomy of the middle ear. Then slowly you can start putting a ventilation tube. Then you can start elevating the tympanomeatal flap, and then when you are confident enough that you can do a complete transcanal surgery, then select your first case. So when you are selecting your first case, it's always good to have a case with a wide ear canal, small posterior central perforation without any inflammation, infection, or granulation tissue. And this is about starting the tympanoplasty or the myelingoplasty. But when you want to start doing your cholesteatoma cases, it's a very good idea to get a CT scan done before surgery, because it really gives you the idea about the extension of the disease. So if the disease is extending far beyond the posterior limit of the lateral semicircular canal, then you have to prepare yourself for the microscopic post-auricular approach. But when you are selecting your first cases, try to look for mesotympanic cholesteatoma or attic cholesteatoma, which is lateral to the ossicular chain, because these are the cases which are really easy to deal with. So pearls and pitfalls, I already mentioned. Start doing autoendoscopy in your clinic. Try to use endoscope in the ear canal. That will really help you to like select your first initial cases, because you can look at the size of the ear canal. You can look at the curvature of the different ear canal, and especially when you are using any angled endoscope, you need to avoid any trauma to the ear canal when you are inserting this endoscope. It usually happens when you're using a more angled scope like 45-degree. Uh, for initial cases, you need to add some extra time to your OR list, because definitely it's obvious that you will take some extra time for the surgery. Already mentioned about the patient with a wide ear canal and simple uninformed pathology. Spend some time trimming your hair, and please don't give up too early. I know it happened with me as well. When we start elevating the tympanomeatal flap, and if it's bleeding, it's really frustrating. But pack it with the cottonoids soaked with adrenaline, and the bleeding is eventually going to stop. So don't give up too early. And remember, converting to an endoral or postoral is not a failure. You can definitely come another time. You can select your case properly, and you can start doing endoscopic ear surgery. So these are the common mistakes which we make. I have made the same mistakes multiple times when I started this surgery. Uh, I, I just need to make a point on how to manage bleeding during endoscopic ear surgery. So if you are doing your surgery under general anesthesia, try to use total intravenous anesthesia. Tell your anesthetist to maintain mean arterial pressure between 50 and 60, and pulse somewhere around 60. Give a very good a local canal injection. After giving local injection, please don't jump and take your canal incision. Give it some time. Pack the medial canal wall with the cottonoid soaked with adrenaline. Nowadays in the market, there are some fine tipped low power monopolar cautery available, and it is really helpful for the beginners to actually design your tympanomeatal flap, so it reduces some bleeding. If you see any frank bleeder in the middle ear, then you have to use your micro bipolar forceps to control it. And please, if there is any bleeding, pack the middle ear with cottonoids soaked with adrenaline. Believe me, the bleeding is going to stop in another 5 minutes. So don't give up, just wait and watch. I've already mentioned how to avoid the trauma with the angle endoscope when we insert inside the ear canal. And we need to understand the limitation of the equipment, because most of the time with the angled endoscope, it happens that we can see that particular recess or area within the middle ear cavity, but with the available instruments which we have, it really becomes difficult to access those areas. So for those particular area, you need more curvature and more angled instruments. The endoscope gives us a fish eye view. It means the periphery of the field is more magnified as compared to the central field, and this really gives us a misjudgment about the length of the tympanomeatal flap. So we land up taking a short tympanomeatal flap. There is no harm in taking a short tympanomeatal flap, but when we are curating the posterior superior bony overhang, or when we are doing the atticotomy, it really becomes difficult to maintain the integrity and to do the reconstruction. So the round knife which we are using has a width of 3 millimeters. So you can use this width to measure the tympanomeatal flap and always try to take incision slightly lateral to the area which you are expecting. Taking a slightly larger tympanometal flap is not going to harm you. You can definitely roll it up and you can just pack it away with the cottonoids, and you can do your dissection in other areas. And another thing, when you are doing endoscopic cholesteatoma surgery, especially the attic and antral disease, please avoid the temptation of chasing down the cholesteatoma, because you need to have a 15-minute by the clock rule. We keep chasing the cholesteatoma in order to avoid a mastectomy. But if you are chasing the same cholesteatoma for more than 15 minutes as measured by your scrub nurse, then you have to consider doing a mastectomy. And when you are doing atticotomy, avoid doing like overdoing the atticotomy, because sometimes even a small atticotomy with the angled endoscope will give you proper access to the disease. So avoid overdoing the atticotomy. In cases when you do a lot of, like you remove a lot of lateral attic bony wall, then during reconstruction it really becomes difficult, because there are tendency for the graft to fall and again the retraction comes in. So please avoid overdoing the atticotomy. So we have this international working group endoscopic ear surgery board panel on 18th of July. It's on wins and regret in endoscopic ear surgery, which is going to be happening on 18th of July, 5 p.m. Dubai time. So I really looking forward for you all to join this panel. And good luck, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Okay. Shias, are you there?
Yes, Terry.
So can we?
So you can share screen. So we have a lot of questions from the audience.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
The share screen, is it? Okay. Okay. So can we take some questions, Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, sure. We have all the time.
You know, I think it's a very nice and very what do you call informative and very good talk, and a lot of basics were covered. That's what I get to see from the chat. So I have just gone through some of the questions, and I think maybe they are repetitions, but still in concise, there's some questions that I've listed. Can I ask now?
Yeah, sure.
So the first thing is that because we all have these doubts, so the thing is that we have to, I believe that as otologists, we have to keep, as I said, some of them are exclusively endoscopic or maybe exclusively microscopic, but I think the future is going to be combined use of both, is what I think. So now people talk about single hand versus endoscopic holder. Now, what is your suggestion? Is there any advantage of an endoscopic holder? And because I've seen Professor Macchioni and all operating single-handed, standing with the standard nasal endoscopes. So what is your opinion?
So I'm personally trained as an one-handed surgeon, so we are not using any endoscopic holder. Yeah. I've already mentioned that there are 2 or 3 disadvantages of using an endoscope. First, when you're using 3 instruments in a very narrow ear canal, it really becomes difficult to manage. So you need to pull out your endoscope out. So the image, the quality of image, the magnification which you are getting is not good enough. It's like doing a surgery using a microscope then. So that's what my thought is like. If you compare with the traditional microscopic ear surgery, most of the time we are holding a suction in our non-dominant hand, and most of the surgical work, most of the dissection work we are carrying out with the dominant hand. And the same thing is happening in the endoscopic ear surgery as well. We are carrying most of our dissection, most of our work with the dominant hand. And given a very minimal bleeding which happens, we can pack that area with the cottonoids, and we can still carry out with our dissection with the dominant hand. So I personally feel that it's possible. It's quite possible. Means we are doing surgeries with one-handedly, single-handedly. So that is my thought and my talk on that.
Okay. Now, because people use this the endoscopes attached to the microscope, and then they say that it can be moved forward and backward. The reason why I asked you is that because if somebody wants to start endoscopic ear surgery, say uh, from the scratch, now either he could no, it's important to practice one philosophy and probably changing it to the next one might be difficult. No, either with the older or with the hand. So this is the basic question. So so how does one decide now? This is the thing.
It's really up to you when you're starting the surgery. So I personally feel you can start, because once you will start doing like both hands using the ear surgery, endoscopic ear surgery, then converting it again into a single-handed will be difficult. You will have another learning curve for that. So if you are starting it, start with one-handed, and definitely initially you think that it's really difficult to manage. It looks weird, but slowly you will learn the practice. Like you can start doing it.
So the take-home message is start with one and you stick to that, so
Yes.
that it is whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the second thing is about a lot of people asking about the instruments. So how important you think that some of these modified instruments are, like maybe if a beginner to start with a meringoplasty also, how important is this modified instruments at various sets that we know of, but to use them, like what do you think are the basic, or other words, few basic instruments or some few important of your in your set that is required for you in endoscopic ear surgery?
For endoscopic ear surgery, I need a different angle round knife.
Okay.
First thing, to take proper canal incision, because that is really important. If you misjudge your tympanomeatal flap, or if you are not taking any proper canal incision, then that is going to give a really hard time. Another one is a straight pick like Rosen, which we
Yes.
use, one house to place the graft and to elevate the tympanomeatal flap. And like if you are doing a regular simple tympanoplasty or myringoplasty, I personally feel that you don't need any kind of like specialized instruments to start with. Whatever instruments you have in your conventional microscopic ear surgery set, you can use the same kind of instruments. But once you start doing more cholesteatoma cases, more extensive cholesteatoma, then definitely in those cases you need like energy suction instrument, more cord, dissectors, and like suctions to deal with the feces. Otherwise, you can straight away start your endoscopy surgery with the 4 millimeter, 0 degree, 18 centimeter endoscope, which are using for the sinus surgery, and same set of instruments which are available to a conventional ear surgery set.
Okay. Okay. And the next question is regarding this Tarabachi stitch. Because I've observed in sometimes when people use the conchal cartilage for rhinoplasties. So I've seen that now to prevent the hematoma, they stitch the conchal cartilage. And I've seen them giving a very bad scar here. I mean, it happens at, because you have a bad scar or your conchal region. So what do you think about this Tarabachi stitch? Has it led to any
No,
bad?
because we are not taking the stitch to the conchal region. We are taking it to the canal. So
Okay.
the stitch is not visible. We are sorry.
At the junction of the canal and the conchal cartilage?
No. Way inside. It's way
Okay.
inside the ear canal. You don't see it from outside. Even the nil piercing, you will not see it from outside. And it comes from the postauricular region. So there is no reason for any scar to be happening in that particular area.
Yeah. No, I know that. So that means you need to avoid taking a stitch to the conchal cartilage. That's the thing. That
there is no point in taking to the conchal cartilage, because we need to avoid the posterior cartilaginous the hump which is there. So the taking it over the conchal region is not going to help.
Okay. And you already talked about trimming of the ear canal hairs. So very important.
Yeah, we have to do it for each and every case. Otherwise, your tip of the endoscope is going to smudge, it's going to fog, and it's really frustrating. So you have to give it some time and try to trim it really properly.
Okay. What about using this gel foam, or you sometimes Mirocell pack, Mirocell, small pieces of Mirocell in the ear canal instead of a cottonoid? Because some of us are a little skeptical of using these cottonoids because of the fibers. Now, do you people use it, like how?
No, we use the neuropathy, the patty which we use for the sinus surgery. So there are small neuropathies which are available. We are using that. So instead, you can use cottonoids, because anyways we are going to flush and we are going to whatever fibers are there, we are going to remove it. So there is no particular reason for not using cottonoids for that.
Okay,
And
fine.
you can also use the Merocell. I don't think there is any harm in using the Merocell as well.
Okay. And this one more question that I felt. See, as you said that lot of us or most of us are doing endoscopic sinus surgeries, and also and sometimes into skull-based anterior skull-based surgeries, and we feel we are quite comfortable with the endoscope. But why is that when we shift to endoscopic ear surgery, we all feel that we hold the endoscopes well, we do the surgeries, the sinus and things well. But when it comes to ear surgery, shifting from thinking that we are good sinus surgeons. Why is that difficulty? Is it a mental thing or is it something to do with what do you
Uh,
think? Because I face myself whenever I try. Though I use basically operate using microscope, but what do you think is the hurdle that you need to overcome?
So the thing is, we are all trained as a microscopic ear surgeon. So
Okay.
that's the biggest hurdle. So when we try to shift from one like surgical approach to another, it's really a hurdle. It's really a learning curve which you need to overcome. So I personally feel means there is no harm. Like you can think like you want to do a endoscopic ear surgery, and other day you can just select your case and you can start doing the endoscopic ear surgery. It's not difficult, but given the small space and the loss of depth perception which happens with the endoscopic ear surgery, I think that's the main concern and the main things to worry when you switch from microscope to endoscopic ear surgery cases.
So you mean to say just practice?
It's just the practice. It's just the
Okay.
practice, and it's just the way it looks with the endoscope. That's all.
And what about this? Do you raise the in case of bleeding from the ear while doing canal incisions or raising the tympanomeatal flap in endoscopic ear surgery? Is it do you advise keeping the head up, tilting the head up in case if there's bleeding and you face difficulty?
We usually give a slight head-up position, like a reverse Trendelenburg, and we do all our cases under general anesthesia. We
Okay,
always give that position. But as I mentioned, if there is any bleeding, just wait,
wait,
and
back.
pack your ear. That's it, and there is nothing else you can do about that.
So any chance of inner ear damage because of endoscope and also the defogging agent that you use, inner ear
Inner
damage?
ear, I've already mentioned that whenever you're using this anti-fog, we are wiping off the extra anti-fog with the wet patty, which is there before we insert our endoscope inside the ear. Yeah, there are chances, but we have not seen any of those cases. So, and we keep irrigating the ear, a lot of irrigation during the
Okay.
surgery. So everything is really washed out of the ear.
So is there a problem for the flap, like when you irrigate so much, like because how do you protect your flap now?
No, there is no
Okay.
no
So
issue with the flap.
yeah, one last question. Now some of us do endomeatal meringoplasties using microscope, endomeatal.
Okay.
So when you position this, like where do you position this flap, the tympanomeatal flap? Because is there any difference that you think that the way we position in endomeatal meringoplasty or in endoscopic ear surgery?
Position in the sense when you elevate
Yes.
the
When you
after
elevate the tympanomeatal flap, where do you keep the attachment? Like you either you do it 360 degrees or like you keep it attached.
no, it depends on the size of the perforation. It
Okay.
actually depends. If it's a small posterior perforation, then we'll take a regular 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock incision. And we go more anterior as the size of the perforation is bigger. Okay. So, and we also do this lateral Sheehy lateral graft tympanoplasty. So in that case, we take a complete canal incision and we take out the skin
Yeah.
along with the epithelial layer of the tympanic membrane. So it
Okay.
actually depends on the size of the perforation.
Depends on the size of perforation. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I think we should open it for the audience because I think in general I've asked some of the routine doubts. So if anybody wants to ask questions,
Yes, sir. Unmute one by one. There were few requests. Dr. Shekhar Reddy is from Hyderabad.
Hello, Sri Harsha.
Yes, you can go ahead, sir.
Hello.
Hello, Mustafa.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Reddy.
Mustafa, it was a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes,
It's a nice presentation and why good moderation from. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
It was a good moderation from Udaybanu also. I have been doing since 2014 more than 1500 to 2000 cases I have did endoscopic ear surgeries.
Oh, that's really amazing.
It includes more than 50 staphylotomy cases also.
Mhm.
Um,
So we have to
one
learn
thing
from
I
you
want
then.
to ask is no. Few things I will tell. There are so many questions that to remove that hair. There is Indian market wheat ointment is available. After doing the skin test, we can apply in the ear canal along with some cotton ball, so that all the hair particles will go. After 5 to 10 minutes, we can start. And one more point is yeah, Dr. Janikram, he says that the luminization of airway in the endoscopic nose surgery. Here also we can practice that. We can use other carotenoids or this merosil packs, small, after infiltration. In India, most of the people, they do under local anesthesia. So what I advise is we have to pack with this Gilocan soaked adrenal carotenoids or with merosil, good hemostasis without any, with minimal bleeding, we can do good surgery. And one more advice is what I routinely practice is for small perforation, small tympanomeatal flap elevation. No need for 270 or 360 degree elevation. Only subtle perforations it is recommended. That is my personal observation. And all my ear cases, the subtotal perforation, I keep rim of cartilage. It good it's graph very well, and success rate is also good. Hello,
Yes.
Mustafa?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes,
Yes, I'm
yes.
hearing you.
So only thing I wanted to ask is is there any study that the chances of tinnitus, does it increase in endoscopic ear surgery compared to microscopic ear surgery?
What
Tinnitus.
chance? Tinnitus? No,
Chances of tinnitus.
I have not looked. No, I need to look at. No, I don't know about that.
Because this especially in stapes surgery there is evidence. So in stapes surgery it is evident, the more the time that the window is exposed to this heat, the greater is the chance for tinnitus. More heat is transmitted in endoscopic surgery. In the laryngoplasty also, is there any
No, I need to look at the literature. I am not aware about that. I need to look at that.
Sir, thank
And
you. We'll move on to the next participant because we have a lot of requests to take.
Okay. Thank you, Harsha. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy.
Dr. C.B. Nandyal, sir, you can go ahead.
Yeah. It was a nice presentation, sir, with anatomy and all evidence based. Very nice presentation to Mustafa. Very nice, sir. Very lucid talk. Very excellent presentation. Till today, I heard about the endoscopic ear surgery. One more thing I want to like to add is in aticoleosteatoma, we always blame that eustachian tube is the responsible for retraction pocket. But you know the entry and posterior they are blocked either by edema or infection or keratoma. Then also even though eustachian tube is normal, that entry and posterior ischemicus is a block will cause attic retraction. So while removing the osteatoma is lateral to the ossicles, we have to join entry and posterior ischemicus. And we have presented that in Indian Journal of Otolaryngology and named it as MRMC ventilating port. So in all lateral aticoleosteatoma, lateral to the ossicles, we have to join entry and posterior and give the ventilation and drainage to the attic, because attic secretions are gravity dependent drainage because there is no mucocelia in the attic, and the mucosal fold is sloping towards the isthmus, and even the antrum is also sloping towards the isthmus. So drainage is gravity dependent and by sloping of the attic folds and the antrum towards the isthmus. So we have to, when the eustachian tube is normal, we have to join entry and posterior ischemicus. That is more important. That's one I wanted, and I have done that study and it is published in Indian Journal of Photolaryngology.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that information.
Yeah. One more, sir. How to prevent this bleeding, bony bleeding? Because mucosal bleeding, if we keep cotton net for prolonged time, you can control. But what about the bony bleeding?
Bony bleeding, as such, when we are curating, then only the bony bleeding will come up.
Sir, in tympanomastoid suture line, especially while lifting the tympanometal flap, you get bony bleeding in the posterior canal wall through the tympanomastoid suture line around that area, sir.
I think if
we
you
experience lot of time.
But I think if you just pack it, it's going to stop. If it's not stopping, you can use a monopolar cautery at a low setting, and you can just buzz that area. That's it. I think it's not going to create a lot of problem during the surgery.
Any cautery can be done, sir. Cautery can be done on the bony canal wall. Cautery.
Yeah, we can do that. If there is any frank bleeding which you are seeing, you can use the cautery. But you need a specialized cautery for that.
Yeah, because we have got insulated this thing, your insulated suction like that. We can use that.
Yeah, we can use that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Ramesh Rohiwal sir from Aurangabad. Please.
Very good evening. It was a wonderful presentation by Mustafa.
Thank you, sir.
I have interacted with you earlier. I have attended your webinars about CI initially.
Okay.
I just wanted to have your opinion about, and to be very honest, I'm into the otology for last 35 plus years, and you have stated correctly, never give up. I am not yet given up. I am trying and I am modifying my few things and slowly getting geared up into the endoscopic ear surgery also. I wanted to have your opinion whether how much experience you have about the cartilage plasty, which is very popular for regarding this endoscopic ear surgery, cartilage plasty. Are you using cartilage as a graft routinely?
No, we are not using cartilage as a graft routinely. We just harvest the tragal perichondrium and we're using the perichondrial graft for reconstructing the eardrum.
I heard you telling that. It's a perichondrium.
But personally, we are not using that much of cartilage to reconstruct the tympanic membrane. We use cartilage just to reconstruct the attic area after that.
Yeah, that is true.
But personally, I don't have much of the experience of cartilage tympanoplasty, but we can definitely do it. But there are many studies which implicates that the cartilage, when we do the cartilage tympanoplasty, the amount of vibration which is supposed to happen, it doesn't happen. So there is some degree of
damping of the vibrations.
Yeah. That's the
just,
thing which is there.
Just additional precautions. If you have any suggestions, the only fear, whenever we are using drill when we are doing endoscopic ear surgery, that fear is very much there. The drill bit touching sometimes the tip of the endoscope and all. What extra precautions will you advise for a beginner like me?
Stay away from the drill. We are not using drill a lot of time. We are using curate most of the
Curates,
time. We have not used very.
Agree with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your nice. Thank you.
I think Dr. Mustafa, I think a fantastic talk. So I think there'll be I'm sure a lot of questions and a lot of debate can be done. But I think the idea was to start with the right person, talking about endoscopic ear surgery and some of the very basics that we wanted to talk. And probably we'll do more sessions like this. So
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hopefully we'll learn a lot from you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mustafa, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. Okay.
Thank you.
And I think this is the last day of your subscription, right, for the Zoom. And you're taking a break, or you are going to keep it going for the next few days?
We'll take some short break.
Short break. Okay, fine.
Actually, some of us are getting back to work. Actually, it's been a month, so now we're actually into work now. I don't know how it is in Dubai.
Yeah, no, it's same here now. We started working again, so I think the participants level is going to go down now.
Yeah, so it is.
Everyone will be
because schedule is unpredictable sometimes.
Yeah.
Logins today for this webinar.
Good number of people, yeah.
presentation. Sir, I think we had answered most of the questions, I guess. Of course, some questions may not be answered because of time constraints. I think they can interact with Dr. Mustafa personally if they have a very genuine question to clarify. Once again, thank Dr. Mustafa and Dr. Uday Banu for moderating this session. With this, we end this webinar. Have a good night, all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.